Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for May 24, 2022, the Who Cares About Miami edition. Well, we know who doesn't care about Miami, and that is Stuart Kirk, head of responsible investing for HSBC, who said of climate change risk, quote, "Who cares if Miami is 6 meters underwater in 100 years?" Well, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of mentality is exactly why the planet is in such trouble. He went on to say that investors need not worry about climate risk. Obviously, he's going to be long dead when Miami's underwater. And if you can't flip a finger to Miami, well, I guess you're not a worldwide bank. So very interesting comments. I would note that HSBC has distanced itself from these comments. Next up, from the Risk and Compliance Journal at the Wall Street Journal, Dylan Tokar reporting, ex-Panama president's sons were sentenced to 3 years in prison. 2 sons of former Panamanian President Ricardo Martinelli were extradited to the U.S. last year to face charges stemming from a bribery scheme involving the Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht. The sentencing, which took place in Brooklyn, comes after the 2 brothers pleaded guilty to money laundering conspiracy charges following what prosecutors described as an extraordinary effort to evade prosecution in the U.S. They will each pay a $250,000 fine and forfeit nearly $19 million or cumulatively forfeit nearly $19 million, as well as forfeit various assets for their ill-gotten gain. Next up, from the Washington Post, note this is in the op-ed section, not the news section, but columnist Paul Waldman says that the GOP has completely lost its bearings around corruption, and that corruption is now the norm for the GOP. And he, of course, points to Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin, who both have inked lucrative deals with the Middle East after providing those nations with largesse from the United States. So you want to know what corruption looks like? Well, you don't have to look very far. And then finally, from Reuters, Trump judges are finally getting their way in terms of holding sway and attempting to gut federal business legislation. The latest instance came from the Angels of Death. That would be the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal in New Orleans, who decided that the SEC's use of in-house judges in administrative proceedings violates those defendants' rights to a constitutional right to a jury trial. Now, administrative law judges have been in place since the 1930s, and when you see this kind of decision, you see an attempt to reverse almost 100 years of jurisprudence. So that's what you get when you get a Trump appointee. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.